Good afternoon, everybody. Very warm welcome to this session on Retrofit Coordinator case studies. I'm still expecting more people to come in because we've had standing room only so far, haven't we? It's really exciting to be standing here in front of such a packed room. Around about, what year is it, 2023? Around about 12 years ago, when I first started working in the world of retrofit, we came up with the term Retrofit Coordinator. With a few people like Bob Pruitt and Peter Rickaby and various others the retrofitterati have been around forever. So I remember sitting in the room where that word was first, or those words were first invented. I've still not quite convinced the industry it doesn't have a hyphen in it. All right, Retrofit Coordinator is one word, no hyphen. And retrofit does not deserve a capital letter always either, but that's another story. I won't digress. So the other thing that's exciting about the development of the scale of which Retrofit Coordinator, the whole profession is scaling up, standards are rising all the time, and today we're going to hear from three people who are sort of at the leading edge of that profession and the approaches that they take. Now, I'll stress that not every retrofit coordinator takes the same approach. So we pick these guys quite carefully because we sort of approve of the way they do things. Come along to our awards tonight and you'll see a shortlist for Retrofit Coordinator of the Year, and we approve of the way they do things too. But it's not all plain sailing, and there are lots of different approaches, and some of those approaches aren't what we, from the Retrofit Academy perspective, think they should be. So that's important. I should say who I am, sorry, my apologies. I'm David Pierpoint, I'm the Chief Executive of the Retrofit Academy. So this is going to be an interactive session, as in we're going to have a few presentations and then we're going to have as much time for questions at the end as possible. So start thinking as we go. I've got a few in reserve, but I hope not to have to use those, okay? So we're going to hear first from Fallon Warren, who is a retrofit coordinator and various other things in the world of social housing, so working for Orbit Housing, and sort of from that client side perspective. So we're going to hear about retrofitting properties from Fallon's perspective. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I've got to say, it's so lovely to see so many people actually taking an interest in retrofit. Super passionate about this. It's now my full-time job, as well as various other things that David alluded to. But retrofit on the ground is where we all need to be, and really it's the right thing that we should be doing moving forward. Oh, there we go. So I am Fallon Warren, Senior Retrofit Building Surveyor for Orbit. We have a portfolio of 50,000 properties across the Midlands, the South and the East, ranging in listed buildings, conservation areas, right the way through to new build properties. And we have various social housing decarbonisation fund projects that I will talk you through as a case study. So, a little bit on our demonstrator project. This has been a labour of love, should we say, and actually has been done in the perfect storm through COVID, through Brexit, material costs, skill shortages, and what we've looked at is properties ranging from 1900s, 30s up to 1960s. And those properties have been a mix of archetypes, from bungalows to mid-terrace to semi-detached. So we've had some real challenges of all the different archetypes and how we look to retrofit those and the measures that we can apply. What we did do was took our worst first. So these properties are band D and below, all the way down to an E. And we've looked at a different package of measures, looking at fabric first and deep whole house retrofit. So this is not just installing one measure, it's installing a package of measures to risk path C, and also creating medium-term plans, which are our property passports, and building those property passports into our cyclical programs and our maintenance programs to make it business as usual within the organisation. This project itself was in Stratford, which is the image you can see on the top left-hand side. And because this was BAYS funded, they're not BAYS anymore, I have to get that right, We had minimum standards that we had to achieve, which was Band C, EPC, and it was a 50 kilowatt heat demand. That hasn't been achieved. Some projects have, but ultimately because our properties were really hard to treat, we hit 90, some have been 110, 120, but we've been able to demonstrate what the benefits have been to the customer living in the property and the knock-on effect that those measures have had in terms of benefits to improve thermal comfort, but also reduce heat demand, so the energy demand the customer is using at those properties. So a little bit about the challenges as a retrofit coordinator and how we've looked to include the client, the contractor, the designer, the assessor, all of those roles built within PAS 2035, and how we've collaborated and worked in partnership to create the best outcome that we can for each property in the project. So customer engagement is actually probably a whole different seminar in itself, and how we engage customers and give them a voice in the retrofit journey. Dwelling assessments, if you were here for the session previous, it looked at the what goes into a dwelling assessment. This demonstrator project was done right at the beginning of retrofit, and what we learned really early on was that standard just wasn't enough for us. We actually went out 3 times to each properties and did more surveys. As you can imagine, the customers weren't too impressed with that. So moving forward into our other wave of projects, we are doing a level 3 RICS building survey because we're trying to do it right first time. Unknown property issues, so that's your defects. So you've got structural damage, whether that's subsidence, you've got roof splay, you've got cracking in areas you probably wouldn't expect to have cracking. You name it, we've had it. So your remedials need to be done. Doing that prior to installing any measures, making sure your sequencing of work is right, and also the design that you've got for your junctions is appropriate to the building to mitigate any unintended consequences. We really don't want to be retrofitting and coming back because there's issues with damp, mould and condensation. Planning. If anybody's done a project that involves local authorities and planning, you will know my heartache and my headache when it comes to external wall insulation. We've had properties on the same street where we've actually had to do a different finish on render because of the streetscape. So planning can be tricky, but it can be overcome with the right conversations. Standards and measures was touched on previously as well, having a standard across retrofit that we can all work to achieve best practice, share common goals. One issue we found when we were installing windows was the PAS 2035 specification said you bring your windows into the plane of your external wall insulation. Fencer won't give you a certificate for that, so it's finding a happy medium between the two, 1 to mitigate any thermal bridging, and 2 to gain your guarantees and your warranties from Fencer. That has been fed back to the group, the working group that was looking at that. Just the complexity of a whole house deep retrofit and how that impacts on all parties involved. So it's not easy, I'm not going to lie to you. Doing a deep retrofit with a customer in situ living in that property is challenging, and it's how you manage those expectations and make sure that you're doing the right thing at the right time. Said about volatile market and competing pressures. The other thing, if you're doing retrofit projects, is actually having the frontline people with the skills and the competencies to install the measures that you want. Flat roofs, there are very few PAS 2030 accredited installers out there that can actually install you a roof to the specification that you need. So make sure your supply chain is warmed up and geared up prior to getting involved in the project. Just a few little images to show you some before and afters. So the top row is what it looked like before. The bottom row is what it looks like after we've done the measures that we want. Mainly you can tell the difference with external wall insulation. So the first one is just white, smooth white render. That had to have planning again. We worked in Stratford District, so they are a little bit more tricky when it comes to planning and streetscapes. But it was made possible because of the conversations and building those relationships, building the rapport. The second photo is actually art brick. Now, if anybody's installed external wall insulation, Art brick is 40% more times more expensive than normal standard render and brick effect render. So you may have to use it. If you can avoid it, it will improve your bottom line on your costs. And then just so you can see a bungalow and what the bungalows look like. Expect the unexpected. So as a retrofit coordinator, the data that your assessors will give you should hopefully give you an indication of what's going on at those properties. If you've had your assessment done with a 6-month, 12-month time period difference, that could all change when you go in as retrofit coordinator. So please do expect the unexpected. And also, as a retrofit coordinator, because you're having those customer conversations with people living in the properties, they may say one thing to one person and they may say something completely different to you. And you also may find on an occupancy assessment, there was only one person there when that was done. Well, hold on, 4 or 5 people have moved in next, and that whole occupancy assessment and ventilation strategy will have to be changed. The measures may have to be changed. So just think ahead of what may come. Neighbours and boundary issues, if you've got, so for us it's a social housing, we are the landlord, we own one property. You've got an owner-occupier next door, just be wary of your party wall issues, serving a party wall notice. That will impact on your time frame. It will also impact maybe of what work you can and can't do, and they may object, and then you have to go down the legal route. Plants, climbers, vegetation. You might find there's a great big wisteria that's gone up one side of the building. That's going to have to come off if it's a solid wall. Taking that off, you will find structural issues because of how it's embedded in the mortar. So again, just thinking of the different things that can impact the project going forward. I always put cat flaps on. We now have dog flaps and children flaps, I'm told. But that will also affect your ventilation strategy. If you're replacing doors and your customer has a cat flap in, tell them not to put it back in that door, because one, it'll affect the performance of that door. It'll affect the warranty and the guarantee when they start cutting holes. It'll also affect your air pressure test. And incoming mains cables. When your assessor is doing your assessments, please make sure they are picking up on electric cables, incoming services, because you will have to go to your district network, you're going to have to go to your local electric companies to maybe move meter boxes. So all of that, again, is your remedials prior to doing your deep retrofit. And that's it. That's me. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fallon. Are people flaps a real thing? Microphone.
Is it on? Oh, it's on. It was a stable door that had been cut to allow the children to go in and out of the back door.
Okay, right. Okay, I don't think that makes them a real thing, but thank you. And thanks for sharing that. There's so much real-world learning. You know, we've been talking about retrofit coordination for a decade in quite theoretical terms. Those sorts of learnings, what you actually find in the field, are absolutely fascinating and valuable. Do we have any other retrofit coordinators in the room? Just raise your hand if you are currently a retrofit coordinator. Oh, great. Okay. So you're finding the cat flaps in the wisteria too, I hope. Okay, now a question to bear in mind as we go into our next presentation, just reflecting to think about, is the extent to which you as a retrofit coordinator could know those things without seeing those properties. Okay? Is that possible or not? Just hold that thought and we'll come back to it. Okay, we've got a double header now from 2 gentlemen who I think I got to know about 5 years ago separately, and then you've sort of become joined at the hip. So we can't give you separate presentation slots. You have to they have a bromance and they're going to talk together. So it's up to them how they do that. So Tim Freeman is, I think you're the owner, aren't you? Owner of Compliance Specifics, and John Morehouse from Constructive Thinking Studio, so design focus coordinator and retrofit coordination and assessment expertise. So let's hear your case study. And I don't know who's first.
You coming that side?
You can go that side. I need to see.
Okay, you can see here.
Oh, we can see here. There you go. Okay.
Oh, afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, David. I'm John from Constructive Thinking, and this is Tim from Compliance Specifics. I'm largely a designer. I work with a team of architects, and Tim is largely compliance-based, but we know each other's industries and businesses really well. And I think what we're going to talk about today is really two things: collaboration and scale. There was life before PAS, and we did retrofit before PAS. We didn't just start, so we've learnt our trade. A good 12 years ago, I was involved with Retrofit for the Future. Just a show of hands, does anyone remember Retrofit for the Future? Okay, great, that's good. I bring this up because there's some really good books and articles based on that programme. Basically, it was TSB was funded 80 live retrofit projects that were all deliberately and materially different, and the solutions were pretty good. So if you have a solid wall conservation house or an airy house or a Cornish house that you want some information on, have a look at those projects. They were monitored, and they're still a really good source of information. Interestingly, from there on, I was involved in a project called Scaling Up Retrofit, which again was TSB BRE programmed. It was in Antrim in Northern Ireland. David Grew, who was doctor then, professor now, I was fortunate enough to work alongside him on that project. And in the handover, the project was pretty successful. We managed to hold 7 houses. It took us a year, but the 7th one worked quite well. At the end of the project, David said, just off the cuff, and if I'm paraphrasing you, David, and you're here, I apologise. He said, we can tell people what they ought to do, but we can't make them do it. And my thought today, when I saw David, was with PAS we can. So we now have actually some control on the delivery of retrofit. Redressing the balance with National Energy Action was our first real deep retrofit large-scale programme. We managed to hold 35 properties in Halton, and they were no fines. We thought 35 was a huge number. And that really took us up to the beginning of PAS. I'll just hand over to Tim to talk about ECO.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm here as compliance specifics. Many of you all know energy specifics, know me better for that. And energy specifics is very much part of what we do because we're an installer as well as a compliance business, two separate businesses. And I think it's really important because actually, Fallon, we are one of the few companies that have our flat roof PAS 2030, as it happens. That's an aside. But actually, we very deliberately set ourselves up for that because our learnings on a daily basis from PAS 2030 as an installer really impact on what we do as coordinators and assessors on the compliance side. So we see them being very closely linked, and we're in a fortunate position where we're literally sort of metaphorically under one roof where we can talk to each other as opposed to trying to talk to another company. So our background was really eco-driven, and we've been through the iterations of eco over the years and the challenges and the frustrations and the clawbacks and the everything. So that's how we sort of came to the table on this.
Okay, so the first project we want to talk about is Greymare Lane. This was an SHDF demonstrator. It's just coming to its conclusion, so if your demonstrator's still running, don't worry, they take longer than a year. There's a lot of lessons learned. Great thing about Greymare Lane was it was a project we'd been involved in for 2 years before the demonstrator, and we'd picked some pilots and we'd taken our lessons from David and co, and we'd done our research, we dug deep into some of the voids in the properties, we understood the building physics. Again, no fines concrete, very difficult to deal with until you realise you've got to stop the air leakage. The great thing about this project was it's part of a bigger regen project. We're working with another architect who's doing 200 new build, so it's all about regeneration of an area. And what we learned from that is we're not just going into houses doing things to people's properties. We're actually changing the way those neighbourhoods work, changing the way people operate within their houses. And it's really important to take that wider focus. As soon as we start putting properties in lists and looking at individual properties and ticking them off, we forget what those properties and neighbourhoods are. that was our first foray into PAS 2035 as well. We learned that we were doing a lot of things right. We learned that PAS also helped us do some more things right. And I think we also learned that PAS is a growing field, it's a growing field of understanding, and we don't yet have all the answers.
So this is for me, right? For you, Northampton. So this was the project John and I actually met on, and as David said, there's a bit of a bromance going on here, but we've learnt a huge amount from having a really close relationship with what I think are the best designers in the country, obviously, and I think vice versa. So we've actually moulded our services together. Of course, we can do them separately, but it's an iterative process, and I think that good coordination is really difficult for a one-person band. We're a group of coordinators. We talk about stuff. Of course, one person has to lodge the reports, but there's an awful lot that goes on in the background. And communication from the very first discussions with a client about a possible project is central to good coordination, in my opinion. So we worked on this project for NPH, as it's affectionately known, from the demonstrator. Was it demonstrator? It was demonstrator, yeah. Now it's wave 1 and going into wave 2. And I think it's fair to say it's a picture postcard delivery on the SHDF. We've had really engaged clients. The tenants have been unusually receptive and responsive to having their properties improved, which is incredibly refreshing because we've all had the no-shows from tenants on things. And this project, because we were engaged separately but together in a way at early doors on this, we were able to take a very strategic look with the MPH team around how we pick the projects. So I think if we go on to the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah. You can talk about this one.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Northampton is, and Northampton and our contractor Waits are in the audience, I can see, so I have to give you the credit where it's due. Northampton was a really collaborative project. And again, we started this, we didn't have all the answers. We found all the things that Fallon talked about and more when we got to the properties. But we worked together and we found solutions. So the scale so far was from 7 in Antrim through to 35, then through to, well, we're nearly up to 500 with Northampton. And that takes us into Wolverhampton, where the client came to us and said, well, we want to do 1,400. How do we put this project together? And there's a really important takeaway from this project is that if we'd have just picked 1,400 properties from a list, maybe ranking them worst first, we would have been sunk. What we did collectively, and again as a team of contractors, compliance designers and the client, was we looked at all of their properties and we found commonalities. Actually, this project has 10 different system build archetypes, not quite 140 of each, but it's that sort of number, which means that with the system builds we can really get to understand how they work. We can share the information with others. This data can run PAN project and PAN client, and so it should. So you can see the little map here, but not the numbers. When they said you've got a big screen, they mean you've got a big screen. So this is split into boroughs. Actually, there's 2 contractors working on this. It's an uplift from the planned maintenance contracts that already exist, but we're taking a really different approach. So another takeaway from this is we see retrofit as a construction project, not just an extension of planned maintenance. So we could show one of those, couldn't we? Yeah.
I can't see this actually.
You can't see this.
Sight's really bad on this.
Okay.
You can talk about
I'll
this
talk
one.
this one then.
You talk it.
So these are, you may know these as Cornish properties. Plenty in Cornwall, but they're not only in Cornwall, they're all across the country. And there are different types. They're the ones that you've seen probably in your own borough that look concretey on the ground floor, and then they've got some timber frame above in a sort of mansard roof. I looked at one in Northampton last summer, and the upstairs was getting up to 50 degrees. So again, we always think about these projects in winter, and we're designed to make places warmer, but we've got to think about heating as well, because the upstairs rooms are basically just loft spaces. What we learned from designing these is applicable to most of the Cornish types. So collectively, if we're finding this a way of sharing this data without necessarily sharing design responsibility, we can solve these problems at scale. So this was one of the archetypes. I think there were 9 others. Happy to talk to anybody about those. So we can see the scale building up now. How do you then deal with bigger properties? And this is Philpot. Do you want to talk about Philpot?
I'll talk about Philpot. So this was a scheme for London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, and this image is showing the process that largely Constructive have put together. So it's a scan to BIM model. So we're using state-of-the-art LiDAR scanning, which is the bit on the left of the building there, to create the point cloud scan, so that we're getting a very accurate dimensional cloud of the building. And that can then be turned into a parametric BIM model, which is the bits going around the side. And the beauty of that is that can be energy modelled to a millimetre of its life, as I like to say. So you can play around with the various mixtures of measures that come out from the retrofit assessment and the medium-term improvement plan. You can look at cold bridging, achieving a 90 kilowatt hours per square metre per annum. You can be very certain about how that building can perform without the tenant part of that, because obviously tenants do what tenants do, shall we say. So that forms the basis of the retrofit design process from that point. And it's, as John said, it really is, we collectively look at it as a construction job. So this enables the rapid production of construction drawings, the energy modelling, the cold bridge analysis, the FRSI calculations, which I think from a retrofit coordinator point of view is A, mandatory for PAS, but B, we work across the industry with lots of different people, and you would be amazed at how many times we don't get this information. We have to go back and ask for it. And I think as a retrofit coordinator, the scale of what we have to do, and I know we're going to come on to this with David, it's huge, and we don't have enough resource, so we can't all do everything. We have to work collectively, and this is where I think where you have a sort of almost a symbiotic relationship, or a very close working relationship with others in the retrofit sector, pays dividends, because you learn how each other's workflows occur, and where we might need some additional help around calculations, for instance, or site visit, boots on the ground, somebody needs to go and talk to a tenant. We're often asked as coordinators, can we, not us, but can we do a retrofit design on a house without going into it? And of course the answer is no, because you don't know what's happening behind the front door. You don't know how many people are in there, you don't know what they're doing, what their lifestyle's like. So my often said analogy for becoming a retrofit coordinator is, I think that when you get your qualification, which I think is a brilliant qualification, it's a bit like you've passed your theory of your driving test, and then somebody's suddenly going, here's the keys, and it's like, what do you do? And you need process, and you need people around you. I know there are some platforms out there that offer a service. We choose not to go down that route for various reasons. but collaborate is the way to do it. And a project of this size in Philpott Square it's a complex being because of the scale of it, the number of tenants, the orientation of it, the build type, and yeah.
There's a nice thing about this project that I want to talk about. So let's just say, are we good for time? 2 minutes? Let's just say that PAS is great. It's a framework we can work within and without. It helps us be compliant. But it's a beginning, it's a leg up. I would always encourage you to think beyond the brief. So the brief for this project initially was, can you go and have a look at it and get all the properties to EPCC and make it PAS compliant? And then we started looking at condition. And actually, do we keep the gas boilers or do we put heat pumps in? You could probably all give me a thought. But we looked at the gas boilers and they were 25 years old. They're not regulated, they're on 24/7. They're using twice as much energy as they need to in their own right. We also looked at the roofs, and the roofs weren't insulated and are not very good and need some love. So if we're re-roofing, we can put PV on. If we're putting PV on, we can introduce heat pumps. If we're using large heat pumps that make quite a bit of noise, we've got to be careful where we site them. So we're proposing that we build some stillages for them to sit on, and then we can park underneath and have some electric charging that uses some of the energy from the PV. So it's that level of thought that we can apply when we get a decent scale project. So I think we might just leave you with these 4 points. It wasn't a deliberate acronym, but retrofit is tough. We think teamwork is the absolute starting point, and tough's good. Tough's good because we're all quite bright, aren't we? We could all take that challenge. If it was easy, you'd get your retrofit from B&Q, but it's not easy. Requires teamwork, requires understanding. You have to have the knowledge to deal with the buildings that we're looking at. It requires focus. You cannot take your eye off the ball, and it requires thought about the future. Whenever we walk away from a project, we leave residents in that project and a poor asset manager who's not heard of retrofit stuck with looking after those properties. So that's probably our time.
Do you sit back down?
Okay, thank you very much. Fascinating case studies, I'm sure you'll agree. So I'm going to ask for hands in a second, so have your questions ready. But I want to come back to this question I posed earlier. Right? What is the panel's view about Retrofit Coordinators saying, I can do this as a desktop-based exercise, I don't ever need to visit the property? What would your response to be? And Tim, you've got the mic, you go first.
Hello. Hello. Yeah, I think this sort of touches on can you software your way out of PAS 2035? And the answer is no, in my opinion. Can it help PAS 2035? Absolutely it can. But a piece of software is only as good as the inputs that go into it, and it has no sensors. It can't touch, smell, feel, talk to the tenant, understand what that property is. So yeah, you absolutely have to go into that property. So,
Close to your mouth.
oh, closer.
Yeah, closer.
Okay.
As a retrofit coordinator, project manager, building surveyor, I don't think you can really know your project and your properties without physically seeing it for yourself. There's nothing better than going in, looking at it with your own eyes, understanding the information that you've got in front of you and how that relates to what you're seeing. So, no.
So an unequivocal no. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm coming to you, the audience, now for questions. We've got a lady with a microphone, gentleman there, please. And next, we'll have the next question lined up too, so if you'd like to raise your hand. Next question. Okay, thank you. Go there next.
A question for Fallon, really, in terms of retrofit. If you've got a tenant who's got, say, a suspended floor, how do they react when you say, we're going to rip up all your floors to insulate?
Funnily enough, I've had that one. It depends on the customer, how many people are in the property, and are they okay with us doing it? So you're managing your customer expectations for a start. or where we've not been able to do, we've put it in the medium-term plan and we've done it at void. So it really is having those upfront conversations and being open and honest. So done both scenarios.
Okay.
Hi, Dan from Hague Housing. We're a charity that provides homes for service veterans. You mentioned about doing a survey, or an assessment, I should say, and there's only one occupant, and then you come back 12 months later and there's now 4, for example. How are we building the whole design so that the occupancy can change at any point in the future?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's probably one of the bugbears I have with the occupant survey. So I'll look at an occupant survey as a designer, and I'll think, well, this is a 3-bedroom, 5-person house. It may have 7 people in it in the future. I'm going to design to that level, and I want to design in a level of control so it'll function nicely with anywhere between 1 and 7 people. So I think it's a really valid point. So I would see the occupancy survey as just some data that's collected to give you an idea about how the other kind of readings from the house are operating at the moment. So, does it feel damp? Yes, it feels damp. There's only 1 person in it. How's that going to be when there's 5? And so, yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Okay, it's all part of a robust approach. Next question, please. There's a lady at the back. Okay, we'll come to you next. Yeah. Go ahead.
Me.
You have the microphone.
Okay, thank you. 2 questions, really. One of them is about, do we have enough preparation of mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, or mechanical ventilation generally? Because it seems to me that particularly if you have heat recovery, then it requires much more dramatic retrofitting than if you don't have it. And at the same time, it seems to me that in our large urban areas, we should always be doing it. And then the second is about what can we do to try to make sure that all the new build that's happening is not going to require retrofitting and require it in the next 5-10 years. Is it not possible for us somehow to get them to design, for example, the electrical setup so that it can put in PV and have battery, and have the battery actually backing up when you have a power cut? And none of this happens at the moment. I'm not sure if this is beyond the scope. But
it is somewhat beyond. I think that's a question for government rather than and building regulations, rather than retrofit coordinators. But knowing this panel, they will have a view. Let's cover the MVHR question first, John.
Yeah, so MVHR's big challenge. It's particularly a big challenge in houses where you've really got no space to get ducting from one place to another. Great in bungalows, really easy. A bit more difficult in a solid wall conservation area terraced house. But the tech's changing. I mean, the first thing I would say is you really only want MVHR where you reach a certain air tightness, and that's tricky enough in its own right. But the tech is changing, and this is where we need to drive innovation. If we can have heat recovery fans that talk to each other via Bluetooth, for example, they don't need to be connected. And that's where I think we'll find the solutions for retrofit. One of the projects that we've been working on collectively, we've been looking at the future installation of PV and heat pumps, and we are future-proofing them by putting in the cabling. So exactly as you've suggested on new build. I would say on new build, Nick, who's one of the architects I work with, and I drive past a lot of new build, and we think, oh, we'll be retrofitting that soon. So that is one for government, but yes, that's coming.
It is somewhat. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, we've got a question at the back.
Hi there, Alice Monty from Equans. I'm a Retrofit Coordinator. I have a team of Retrofit Coordinators. Really, really interesting to hear your different experiences with it. A bit like Tim said, we work in a team and find that it's really difficult to not, if you didn't have that team around you, those resources around you, how would you actually deliver some of these scale projects? Because there's a lot involved. Fallon, I just really wanted to ask you from your experience then, client side, is that correct? with Orbit Housing?
Yeah, so I'm employed by Orbit, yeah.
Yeah, so what's your experience? Do you have a team around you, or is that something that's fallen on you as being the retrofit coordinator, everything to do with that?
Well, we have expanded. We have a decarbonisation team. I was one of two. So yes, it did all fall on my shoulders at one point, but we've recently expanded. Luckily, we have in-house capability. But as the client, to give us more control, we will outsource, especially for a retrofit coordinator, where we're going down a path C, because we don't want a conflict of interest, but also I don't want to be marking somebody else's homework, in essence. So dependent on the path, I've RC'd lads and hugs projects just because it's a smaller project and having that capacity. But when it comes to whole house retrofit, it is worth having those independent people in place, but it also allows for innovation, collaboration, and really pushing those lessons learnt forward.
Okay, and Alice, I think we're exploring that a bit more depth tomorrow, aren't we? Down at the front, please.
Computer modelling, PHPP and WFI. What a lovely acronym that is. As somebody who's retrofitting their house at the moment or thinking about it, how important is computer modelling and how expensive is it?
Two great questions. It's really important. If you don't model, how do you know what you're going to get? PHPP, actually, it's really good. It's not massively expensive. Takes a bit of time to learn to use it well. So if you were just learning it for one project, unless you really love that sort of thing, you might ask somebody else to do that for you. I tend not to use PHPP simply because the industry demands that I deal with SAP. And our practice, we model everything in some BIM software called ArchiCAD, and we use Eco Designer to give us all of the cold bridging calculations and so on. So we tend to use SAP, on construction SAP as a design tool, but the information that we put into that comes from the building information modelling. We really like modelling, and we're architects and it's what we do, so I can't see us doing anything lesser, if you like. Is there a requirement to model every building? I think it depends what you want out of it. Cost-wise, I think you can't afford not to model, because you're going to spend on your own house somewhere between 5 and 100,000, depending on what you're going to do, and it's a really important investment.
Okay, I'm just going to, Chair's prerogative, ask Tim to expand a little bit on that. So you seem to be doing a lot of modelling at archetype level there. Did I understand that correctly?
Constructive art. Yeah. So as the retrofit designers, they do the modelling.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I would agree totally with what John said, because if you treat a retrofit as a construction project, on Northampton Partnership Homes, we had 5 primary archetypes on the wave 1, or demonstrator, whichever one it was, and 5 scaffold packages. So the scaffold went up, didn't have to be moved for each archetype. The scaffolder was deliriously happy because he knew he had 5 different designs of scaffold to put up. Didn't have to change when the windows went in or anything like that. And I think you can find cost savings by being rigid with your approach at the beginning all the way through the project. So I'm a firm advocate and believer that the scan to bin to BEM process, end-to-end delivery, more than pays for itself in the cost savings of efficient delivery alone. So.
Okay, fantastic. Lady there, could I ask you just to say who you are and who you work for, please?
Hi, I'm Saskia. I'm a architect and a PhD student studying social housing retrofit. My question, you mentioned it really briefly about overheating. I'm actually studying in Spain, so I'm doing a lot of retrofit of Spanish climate social housing. I'm wondering what kind of techniques that you're thinking about implementing now to safeguard the fact that if we have summers like we just did, we're going to get warmer and warmer and warmer. And a lot of the times I worry that all of this air tightness and external wall insulation is kind of covering up original architectural vernacular that was designed to passively cool homes And I'm just wondering how you're sort of implementing steps in the future to safeguard the fact that airtightness and heat is not going to be the number one priority all the time.
Okay. Who'd like to take that one?
I will, from a very naive perspective.
Tim, sorry, can you just bring the microphone up?
Sorry, is that better?
That's much better,
Sorry,
thank you.
I'll answer that from a very naive perspective, not as an architect, but under PAS, overheating is obviously part of PAS 2035. I personally feel that it's probably the most overlooked aspect of PAS 2035. I don't feel it's being policed out there in terms of what we're doing. I agree absolutely with what you've said. I think for as a sort of bit of a sustainability head, my view is that we should be looking at air conditioning being totally acceptable as an alternative heat pump because the technology is the same as those. We're putting PV on everywhere. I mean, I have PV and I have aircon in my house, and in the summer when it's blisteringly hot, I'm still exporting power to the grid, and I've got my aircon on, and I have a perfectly pleasant environment in there. It's really, they're really efficient heat pumps. In terms of how that's integrated into retrofit designs for hitting 90 kilowatt hours and EPCCs and giving the net zero journey, it's a very that's a very detailed question. I'll hand over to the experts.
Clearly we need an overheating strategy alongside a ventilation strategy, and that's all part of the Retrofit Coordinator's job. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Sorry, I know you had more to say there, but we are out of time. Thank you for all your excellent questions, and particular thanks to our panel who've been very honest and open. A round of applause, please. Thanks so much for your interest in retrofit. There's more seminars throughout the day. The programme's on the outside. And our Retrofit Academy Awards are from 6 o'clock this evening if anyone wants to hang around for a free drink and to see what great looks like, including some of these guys. Please do join us for that. Thank you very much.